The wind in the woods had a mind of its own that night. It moved in circles, tugging at fallen leaves and sending them scraping across the old trail like whispers trying to catch up with each other. Above, the October moon was thin, a sliver of light that seemed too fragile to hold back the blackness between the trees. On the narrow dirt road leading into the forest, headlights carved a fragile corridor of yellow. The hatchback wasn't new, but it was steady, humming as it crawled deeper toward the trailhead. Inside, Jamie Lewis leaned forward over the wheel, his face lit in staccato flashes as branches bent and swung across the light. Next to him, Mark Willis wrestled with the straps of a backpack, laughing at his own clumsy effort. "Man, you packed half the apartment," Jamie said, shaking his head. "Essentials," Mark shot back. "Marshmallows, camera, blanket. We're not roughing it, we're celebrating." The radio crackled between static and a song that only half came through. The night around them pressed close, muffling the sound so it felt like the car was carrying its own tiny bubble of warmth through a forest that wanted it swallowed. They were 19 and 20, old enough to feel the gravity of adulthood circling closer, young enough to believe in rituals. Tonight's ritual was theirs. No crowded house parties, no noise, no neon-lit chaos. Just a fire in the woods, a tent under the trees, and the stubborn reassurance that friendship could hold back the fear of endings. At 10:41 p.m., they stopped at the last gas station. Surveillance cameras caught them. Jamie paying at the counter, Mark holding up a bag of marshmallows like a prize. Behind them, a rack of Halloween masks grinned blankly into the camera. One clerk would later remember the way Mark joked about ghost stories. Another remembered Jamie checking his watch, muttering something about the woods being better than a party. At 11:05 they pulled away, the hatchback carrying them toward the trailhead. A motorist saw the car at 11:30, parked neatly in the gravel lot. After that, the record went dark. Somewhere in the woods, wind clawed through the branches again. Somewhere beyond the light of their campfire, a second pair of headlights blinked once, then died. By morning, deputies would find a tent slashed open, 2 sleeping bags torn and blood darkening the soil. But on Halloween night, the only witnesses were the trees. The woods outside Brookhaven were old, older than the town itself. For generations, people told stories about them. Some said they were cursed by the tribes who once hunted there. Others claimed the trees grew too close, trapping shadows that refused to move. For kids, the stories were entertainment. For parents, they were warnings. But there was another story, less mythical, more whispered. A story about couples who disappeared. In 1987, 2 high school sweethearts never came back from a drive. Their car was found at a trailhead, empty. In 1989, a pair of hikers turned up mutilated deep in the pines. The case was unsolved. Officials offered rational explanations. Wildlife, accidents, strangers passing through. Still, the rumor spread. Someone's out there. He waits for couples. The woods don't like love. By 1992, Brookhaven was a town already holding its breath. Parents warned their kids about late-night drives. Hunters spoke of feeling watched even when they were alone. Every snapping branch carried more weight than it should. Halloween made it worse. Mischief Night, Devil's Night, names carried from bigger cities into their quiet streets. Pumpkins carved, candy bowls filled, but beneath the rituals was tension. Everyone knew what night it was. Everyone knew it was the kind of night that stories leaned on. When Jamie and Mark decided to camp in the woods that Halloween, their friends laughed nervously. "It's just for one night," Mark said. "We're not a couple. We're safe." But evil doesn't care for categories. And the woods don't argue. They simply wait. Jamie Lewis had the kind of curiosity that teachers either loved or dreaded. At 19, he was already the type to linger after class, asking questions that had nothing to do with the test but everything to do with the world. His notebooks were cluttered with sketches of trail systems, side notes about geology, doodles of trees he saw on his weekend hikes. He wasn't the loudest in any room, but he was always looking, always mapping. Mark Willis, on the other hand, was fire to Jamie's water. A year older, with grease-stained hands from working in his uncle's garage, he carried a camera everywhere. It wasn't the expensive kind, just a battered Nikon that he'd taught himself to repair twice. He said he liked capturing ordinary moments, but his photos always seemed to find the strange. A pair of boots left on a fence post, a stop sign riddled with bullet holes, shadows stretching too long across a sidewalk. Their friendship started in 5th grade with a fist fight on the playground. Neither remembered what it was about, but both remembered the principal forcing them to sit side by side for a week. By Friday they were trading snacks and daring each other to bike farther into the woods than anyone else. That pattern never really stopped. By Halloween 1992 they were inseparable. But they weren't thrill seekers. Not in the cliché way. Their choice to camp in the woods that night wasn't rebellion, it was nostalgia. A chance to carve out one last piece of youth before responsibility tightened its grip. Jamie's parents remembered him saying, "It's just the woods. We've been there 100 times." Mark told his sister, "Parties are boring. We'll roast marshmallows and make fun of ghost stories." No one argued. In Brookhaven, young men went camping all the time. But beneath every permission there was a shadow. Everyone had heard the whispers. Everyone knew the woods kept secrets. The night unspoled in fragments, recorded in receipts, in camera footage, in the shaky memories of strangers. 10:41 p.m., Fremont gas station. The receipt shows $15 of fuel, cash. Jamie in a blue flannel, Mark in a dark hoodie. The surveillance tape, grainy and washed in fluorescent glare, catches them laughing, passing marshmallows back and forth like a joke no one else could hear. Behind them, a rack of Halloween masks hangs slack-jawed. A clerk remembers Mark saying something about ghost stories in the woods. Another swears he heard Jamie mutter, "Better than a party." 11:05 p.m., a convenience store across town. They bought batteries and soda. The cashier, later interviewed, described them as normal, polite, in a hurry. But she added something else, that they weren't alone. A man stood behind them in line, silent, carrying nothing. She couldn't describe his face, only that his jacket smelled like smoke. 11:30 p.m., a motorist driving the county road reported a small hatchback parked at the Briar Hollow trailhead. 2 figures unloading gear. He thought nothing of it until the next day. 11:45 p.m., the woods. No witnesses, only imagination. A campfire crackling. Sleeping bags unrolled. Marshmallows skewered. Camera on the log ready for a snapshot. Somewhere beyond the glow, the sound of a twig snapping. 11:58 p.m., Mark's camera clicked one final time. The frame, later developed, showed nothing but blur, streaks of light between trees like headlights where no car should be. After that, the timeline ends. The woods swallowed the rest. The call came in at 7:42 a.m., November 1st, 1992. A hiker who'd planned a dawn trail run reported a wrecked tent near the Briar Hollow trailhead. The dispatcher logged it as possible vandalism. By the time deputies arrived, the story had changed. The hatchback still sat in the gravel lot, frost glazing its windshield. Inside, 2 empty soda bottles, an unopened bag of marshmallows, a disposable camera on the passenger seat. The keys dangled from the ignition, waiting for hands that would never turn them again. The trail was quiet, too quiet, as deputies walked into the trees. At first glance, the tent seemed like a prank. One side collapsed, flaps shredded. But the details clawed at them. Sleeping bags slashed down the middle, stuffing scattered like snow. A lantern tipped over, glass cracked. And the ground was wrong. Leaves lay dark, stuck to something tacky. Soil turned black in uneven patches. One deputy knelt, touched it with his glove, and pulled back red. Blood. 50 yards deeper, under a stand of oaks, they found them. Jamie and Mark, sprawled side by side, faces pale, throats cut. Their wrists bound with nylon rope, their shoes missing. Beside each body, A tree bore a mark carved deep into its bark, a half-moon crossed by a jagged line. The symbol looked ritualistic, deliberate, meant to last. Within hours, the woods filled with deputies, detectives, and state investigators. Yellow tape snaked between trees. Evidence markers dotted the leaves. Dogs circled, noses low. Helicopters hummed above. But nothing in the scene offered comfort. The town's whispered legend, a killer in the woods hunting couples, was no longer rumor. It was carved into bark and blood. News spread faster than leaves in the wind. Parents pulled their children inside. Halloween decorations were torn down before dusk. By nightfall, Brookhaven wasn't celebrating, it was barricading. Detectives knew one thing: killers escalate. The brutality here wasn't random. It was practiced, controlled. And when they looked back, the puzzle pieces were already waiting. 1987. A pair of teenagers, Donna Reed and Michael Carter, vanish after a date. Their car found abandoned near the same woods. No sign of them, no bodies, only tire tracks that led nowhere. Case cold. 1989. Two hikers engaged to be married found deep in the forest. Both stabbed, both bound. No symbol reported at the time, but photographs in the evidence box showed trees with strange scratches. Investigators back then had dismissed it as animal damage. Now, with Jamie and Mark's deaths, the scratches weren't scratches anymore. They were the same symbol. 3 cases. 5 victims. All pairs. All near Briar Hollow. All within 15 miles. Detectives charted the timeline on a whiteboard. A rhythm appeared: every 2 to 3 years another attack. All on weekends. Always outdoors. Always pairs. A profiler brought in from the state capitol laid it out. The killer sought control. He targeted companionship. 2 people bound together was the lure. The symbol carved into trees wasn't random, it was a claim. A way of saying, "This is mine." The town began to buckle under paranoia. Couples canceled trips. Hunters left rifles locked at home. Teenagers who once braved the woods for dares stayed in basements instead. The woods became a presence, not scenery but something alive, harboring malice. And then came the letters. 2 weeks after Jamie and Mark's funeral, the Brookhaven Gazette received an envelope. No return address. Inside, a page torn from a hunting magazine, with the same half-moon and cross symbol drawn in red ink. Across the top, in jagged handwriting, "Do you believe me now?" More letters followed. One with a map of the forest, red X's scrawled across trailheads. Another with a clipping of the 1989 hiking deaths, circled in red. Each envelope bore no fingerprints, no usable DNA, just the same taunt: "Still watching." Brookhaven had been afraid before. Now it was terrified. Brookhaven was no stranger to gossip, but after Halloween night it turned into something else. Paranoia sharpened into survival. People locked their doors at sundown. Couples stopped going out together. The woods, once a place for picnics, fishing, and quiet weekends, turned into a silhouette everyone avoided. The press dubbed him the Hunter in the Woods. The name stuck like tar. For investigators, the case was suffocating. Leads came in too fast, most of them smoke and shadows. Every rustle outside a bedroom window became a call. Every abandoned truck on the roadside became a tip. Deputies were chasing ghosts. And then the letters started. The first arrived in a plain envelope, no return address. Inside, a clipping from a 1987 newspaper, the headline circled in red: "Local couple still missing after drive to lake." At the bottom, scrawled in uneven handwriting: "I decide when the woods are quiet." The second letter carried a sketch. A map of the forest, with excess marked on spots that had already turned tragic. Beneath it, the same symbol carved into Jamie and Mark's oak tree. A half-moon slashed with a cross. Detectives studied the handwriting, the ink, the paper. All ordinary. No prints, no DNA. Whoever the hunter was, he knew the system. Meanwhile, the town unraveled. Teenagers told stories of flashlights moving in the trees at night. Hunters whispered about finding gutted animals left arranged in strange patterns. Whether it was the killer or fear itself hardly mattered. The woods weren't just haunted, they were alive with menace. One deputy described it best. It felt like we were hunting a shadow that was hunting us back. It was almost an accident that cracked the case. Mark's camera had been collected from the tent, bloodied but intact. For weeks, the film sat undeveloped, lost in the chaos of evidence intake. When a technician finally loaded the roll, most of the photos were ordinary. Jamie grinning at the trailhead, the tent half-pitched, the campfire sparks dancing like fireflies. And then the last frame. Blurred, tilted, nearly unreadable, but enough. Between the trees, two beams of light stretched horizontal. Headlights. But not from their hatchback. These came from deeper in the woods, aimed toward them, frozen for an instant before the shutter snapped shut. Detectives enlarged the frame. Grainy shapes emerged. The faint outline of a grill, the corner of a vehicle. The height, the spacing, not a car. A truck. A blue pickup. A witness remembered one always parked near trailheads. A vehicle that never seemed to belong, always arriving late and leaving earlier than others. The kind of detail that felt irrelevant until it wasn't. Police canvassed the county. Registration records narrowed it to a handful of owners. And one stood out. A former logger known for odd hours, a history of violence, and a property littered with tools that looked more like weapons. When they drove past his house, the same blue truck sat in the yard. Dented fender. Tires caked with mud. A bumper sticker half peeled, the letters unreadable. Detective Cross, the one who'd touched the tent fabric that Halloween morning, wrote in his log, "I think we found our shadow." They didn't knock at first. They parked 2 houses down and let the engine ticks cool in the night air. Porch lights along Pine Hollow Road glowed like watchful eyes. Beyond them, the woods stood in one unbroken shadow. The blue pickup crouched in the suspect's yard, mud dried along the wheel wells like a crust of old riverbed. Detective Cross adjusted his collar and checked the warrant for the 5th time. On the porch, a wind chime whispered. Somewhere, a dog barked once and then thought better of it. "Ready?" he asked. Sergeant Mendez nodded. "Ready." They climbed the steps. This time they knocked. The door opened halfway, chain still latched. A man's face in the gap, mid-40s, sun-leathered, eyes like chips of slate. Former logger. Current question mark. "Help you?" "Mr. Rourke," Cross said evenly, "we have a warrant to search the premises and your vehicle." He didn't flinch. Not annoyance, not surprise. Just a momentary stillness, like a deer deciding if the rustle it heard was wind or a rifle. Then the chain slid back and the door swung wide. Inside smelled like oil and old coffee. A TV murmured to itself in the other room. On a nail by the door hung a jacket with pine sawdust still clinging to the cuff. On the counter, a bundle of twine, a utility knife, a map stained with rings from a mug. The map wasn't county issued. It was hand-drawn, trails braided through the forest like veins, some labeled neatly, others marked with excess. Half moon. Cross. Tiny, deliberate, almost careful. "Stay here," Mendez said, and an officer stepped in beside Rourke. Cross moved through the living room with gloved precision, letting his gaze collect rather than leap. The garage was colder. Light swung in a tired arc from a single bulb. Shadows lengthened into sawtooth shapes. The blue pickup squatted there, paint chalked with dust, a crescent-shaped dent on the rear quarter panel like a bite mark. Cross knelt and angled a flashlight. Something glimmered along the dense edge. A smear of reflective tape, the kind bolted to county guardrails. He didn't smile. He didn't move. He just let the moment stand up in his chest and breathe. "Photographing," the crime scene text said, voice neutral. The shutter clicked like a metronome. In a drawer along the workbench they found a bundle of plastic sleeves. Maps again, each one more detailed than the last. The West Ridge. The creek crossing. Briar Hollow trailhead. And on the back of one sleeve, indented lines from hard writing. October 31st, moonset 1:25 a.m. A timetable made of darkness. "Detective," Mendez called quietly. "You'll want to see this." In the far corner, behind stacked tires, sat a plastic tote, lid taped shut. Inside, rope coil, 2 headlamps, a half-used roll of reflective tape, disposable gloves, and a box of surgical blades still in blister packs. Not a hunter's kit. A hunter of people's kit. They cuffed him on the porch. Rourke looked down at his hands as if someone had placed unfamiliar tools in them. He didn't ask a question. He didn't protest. He studied Cross instead, the way a carpenter studies a beam before deciding where to cut. At the station, the interview room had the austere charity of a chapel. Plastic chairs. A table too clean. A clock that refused to speed up. Rourke took the seat facing the mirror and met his own reflection as if greeting an old friend. On the table, Mendez set a recorder and a manila folder. "We're going to talk," Cross said, settling opposite. "This is your opportunity." Rourke tilted his head. "Opportunity," he repeated, tasting the word. "Funny. You own a blue 1986 pickup," Mendez said. "We have photographs of damage consistent with contact with a guardrail. There's reflective tape residue in the dent, same composition as the state border bridge. Your truck shows up near multiple trailheads and witness statements. Your property contains maps that track those sites. Your fingerprints are on them." Rourke's eyes flicked to the folder. "Maps are legal," he said. "Hiking's legal." Cross slid a photo across the table. The last frame from Mark's camera. 2 beams in the trees. A grill caught in the stutter of light. "Is that your truck?" Silence. Rourke studied the blur without hurry. When he finally looked up, a smile tugged just one corner of his mouth. "Do you think the woods miss me?" he asked. Cross didn't look away. He waited the extra beat most people throw away. "I think you never left them," he said. "Lawyer," Rourke said softly and leaned back. They ended the interview. Paperwork sprouted in stacks. Outside, the town breathed out for the first time in weeks, then sucked the breath back in, afraid it had been too loud. In the lab, evidence began to knit its own spine. A hair lifted from a headlamp band, microscopic corroded pigment consistent with dye found in Mark's hoodie. Minute particles of bark from the workbench matched the species of oak carved above the boys. Soil from the truck's wheel wells contained the same silica signature as the floodplain near Briar Hollow. The reflective tape smear along the dent? Composition matched a batch ordered by the county the year before. When Cross finally went home, dawn was fumbling at the horizon. He sat in his driveway a long time with the engine off, hands flat on the wheel, looking at nothing. In the empty house, a floorboard ticked as it cooled. He told himself the sound was just wood remembering its shape. In town, a mother left her porch light on until it burned out. A hardware store owner taped the news clipping to his register. Arrest made in Halloween murders. Teenagers clustered in 3s and 4s at bus stops, talking too loud because silence was still wrong. The woods said nothing. They didn't have to. They had time. Trials are less like storms and more like slow tides. They draw back and show what's been under the water all along. By the time State versus Rourke reached arraignment, the courthouse had already turned into a ritual. People in line at dawn. Thermoses passed hand to hand like contraband comfort. Deputies at the door, faces set to neutral. In the hallway, carved into the maple bench by some bored defendant years earlier, a message read, "Truth takes its time." Someone had underlined it twice. Jury selection took a week. Everyone had heard. Everyone had an opinion. They found 12 who said they could carry the weight without adding their own. On opening morning, rain affixed the town to gray. In the front row of the gallery, Jamie's mother folded and unfolded a handkerchief until it had the soft corners of a child's blanket. Mark's sister sat beside her, jaw set, hands motionless in her lap like 2 obedient birds. The prosecutor, Alice, didn't breathe fire. He didn't need to. He set papers in neat squares, clicked his pen once, and began with a sentence that let silence walk in before the evidence did. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "this is a case about patience. The defendant's patience. The patience of a town. And finally, the patience of facts." He laid them one by one, not as spectacle but as gravity. The half-moon and cross symbol carved into bark in 1989, again in 1990, again above Jamie and Mark. The maps from Rourke's garage, hand-drawn, annotated, dated. The reflective tape residue in the dent that matched the bridge where the camera went dark. Soil signatures. Microscopic fibers. The last photograph, headlights where none should be. He did not show the boys as horror. He showed them as people. A snapshot of Jamie with a trail map doodled in the corner, one of Mark with grease on his thumb, pointing the camera at the camera like a mirror. He said their names the way facts are supposed to be said, clearly as if they were still present. The defense attorney, Klein, wore a suit that tried too hard to be expensive. He smiled as if the room was on the verge of a joke only he could rescue. "No eyewitness," he told the jury. "No confession. Blurry photographs. Maps. People hike. Tools. People work. Fibers? Soil? Do you convict a man because his truck touched a guardrail? Because he drew the world around him? Because fear needs a face." He paused on the phrase "fear needs a face." It hung there tempting and neat. A juror in seat 4 blinked slowly once. They called witnesses. The convenience store clerk, who remembered a man behind the boys in line, silent, jacket smelling like smoke. The motorist who saw the hatchback at 11:30, a second vehicle deeper in the trees that he couldn't explain later because he hadn't seen it yet. He had only felt that something was wrong and dismissed it, because that's what people do when the wrongness doesn't have a name. A hunter who swore he'd found gutted deer arranged with a grotesque tidiness miles from any road. The forensic analyst who let microscopes do the poetry. Silica trinity, pigment residue, a smear that wasn't paint but tape reflecting light back to its source and now to them. Rourke watched carefully. Not sullen. Not charming. Attentive, with the clinical interest of a surveyor pacing off a lot line. Once, when the half-moon and cross photograph was projected, a flicker passed across his face. Not fear. Recognition, the way a craftsman recognizes a line he cut years ago. Ellis saved the letters for day 5. He laid each on felt as if setting out relics. The first clipping from 1987 with the circle in red ink. "I decide when the woods are quiet." The map with XS in the symbol. The third letter, never before public. 6 dates written like a nursery rhyme, a 7th left blank. Ellis read them aloud without emphasis. When he reached the blank line, he looked at the jury and let the unspoken complete itself. Klein tried to carve daylight between the letters and the man. No prints. No DNA. Anyone could have sent those. Cranks. Copycats. But each anyone was a ladder rung away from the truck, the maps, the tape, the soil. The rungs bent when weight was placed on them. Then came the photograph. Ellis dimmed the lights. The last frame from Mark's camera flooded the screen. The smear of headlights caught between trees, angles that made the mind do a double take. He did not pretend the image was sharp. He said exactly what it was. A moment of light, a geometry consistent with a truck grille of a certain height and width, captured within the span of a heartbeat. Photography, he said, is the art of making time hold still. For 1/30th of a second, this frame held something that was hunting them. And it aligns not with a sedan, not with an SUV, but with the defendant's vehicle. Klein rose. Objection, speculation. Sustained, the judge said. Jury will consider only the expert testimony regarding dimensions. Ellis nodded. He hadn't overreached, he had only pointed. The expert followed, measured, confirmed. On day 7, Cross took the stand. He didn't polish his sentences. He walked the jury through the porch, the garage, the tote, the dent. When Klein pressed, Cross didn't argue. He returned to measurements, to dates, to the notable absence of anything exculpatory. "Detective," Klein said, voice silked, "you wanted this man to be guilty." "I wanted the evidence to be honest," Cross replied. "It was. There was one more witness. Jamie's mother." The courtroom rearranged itself around her grief the way furniture rearranges around a fireplace. Inevitable, central. She didn't describe the bodies. She described a boy who made maps in the margins and left granola bars for strangers. She looked at the jury as if they were neighbors deciding whether the town had a future. "I don't want revenge," she said, voice steady. "I want the circles to stop. We walked in circles for years. We let someone draw them for us." No one looked at Rourke then. They looked at one another, and that was worse. Klein's closing was careful. Doubt as a chorus line. No eyewitness, no confession, blurry photographs, ordinary tools, common soil. He paced with his palms open, as if to show he wasn't hiding anything, even as he asked them to hide from certainty. Ellis did not rebut with thunder. He placed the dented panel on a cart and wheeled it close enough for jurors to see the reflective smear. He held up the map sleeves. He didn't hold the letters up. He let them sit, heavy as stones. "Fear does not need a face," he said quietly. "Facts do." The defendant gave them one. The judge read the instructions. The jury filed out. Time reverted to its original state, indifferent. Rain ceased. Sunlight found the floor through high windows and laid squares of pale warmth that no one felt. Cross sat with his hands clasped so still the knuckles went bloodless. Mendes stared at the dent as if it might still tell a new story. 3 hours passed. Then 5. Then 8, and the air changed, the way air in a theater changes when the curtains rustle. They filed in. Seat 4 had a folded paper in his hand and the solemnity of someone carrying a fragile thing. "Madam Foreperson," the judge said, "has the jury reached a verdict?" "We have. In the matter of count 1. Guilty. Count 2. Guilty." A sound moved through the room that wasn't applause and wasn't a sob. It was something in between that towns make together when they realize a weight they've carried so long they forgot it was there has finally been set down. Rourke's jaw tightened once. Not rage. Not surprise. The moment a craftsman recognizes the flaw he cannot sand out. Klein leaned in, murmured something that meant nothing. The judge thanked the jurors for their service and set sentencing for the next morning. When morning came, the room was quieter. Ellis stood and did not enlarge himself. "Life without parole?" he asked. "For both counts?" He referenced the pattern. He referenced the patience of the killings. He referenced the letters only as weather. Present, shaping, undeniable. Klein said words. He had to. They fell like tools dropped on a concrete floor, honest about what they were, useless for what was needed. The judge spoke last. He did not sermonize. He ordered. Life without the possibility of parole. No contact with families. No possibility of writing, recording, or profiting from the crimes. The gavel was an ordinary sound made holy by context. Outside, the town exhaled properly this time. People shook hands they hadn't shaken in years. A hardware store owner took down the clipping and put up a new one. Verdict reached. On Pine Hollow Road, wind moved the chime into a sound that was almost music. Cross drove to Briar Hollow at dusk. He parked where the hatchback had once sat and walked the path until the ground remembered his weight. The oak was still there. The carving had been sanded away by volunteers who wanted to take the symbol's mouth from it, but you could see where it had been, like a healed wound that still itched when rain was coming. He stood a while. Not as a sentinel and not as a pilgrim. As a man who had followed circles until they intersected. Behind him, the woods rearranged themselves into their workable quiet. Not innocence, forests are never innocent, but equilibrium. The kind that lets birds consider branches again, and parents consider porches instead of locks, and teenagers consider laughter that isn't bravado. In court, paperwork would continue. Appeals would file and be denied. Evidence would retire into climate-controlled rooms. Jurors would go home and teach themselves to sleep without rehearsing their decision. The town would not forget. That isn't what towns do. But it would learn to set memory down without always clutching it by the throat. On Halloween the next year, porch lights returned one by one, reluctant stars. Kids ran between them in costumes stitched with last-minute thread. Parents hovered at sidewalks, eyes on the treeline and then on their children and then, slowly, on the sky. At the trailhead, a small sign appeared, paid for by donations in cash and envelopes without return addresses. Read. In memory of Jamie Lewis and Mark Willis. May fear never silence your laughter. The woods said nothing. They didn't have to. They held the sound instead, and for once that was enough.